Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and I am happy to report that we have returning guest Mr. Jeff Nielson from Bullion Bulls Canada, as well as he is a contributing writer for Sprott Money News as well. Jeff, how you doing today?
Not too bad. The Daily Coin's becoming one of my favorite sites, so it's always a privilege and honor to be invited back.
Well, that's very, very kind of you to say, really, and I really appreciate it. And I have to give Sean a shout out because without being involved with SGT Report, I would have never met you, and I would have never gotten introduced to your great work. So,
Well, and of course, Sean certainly helped me get my own writing off the ground as well, so he's kind of a mentor for both of us.
and let's just jump right into this. And I was reading, you had sent me an email earlier today letting me know that you had released your new article, Canada's New Loony Assassin. And I was actually in the middle of reading it when you sent me that email. and it speaks to the devaluation of the Canadian dollar, and in particular under the head criminal Mark Carney and his associate criminal Stephen Harper. And how does his actions tie into this whole Ponzi scheme that's being perpetrated between the other major currencies?
Well, and of course, that's the great question because it's when you look at everything together that the big picture starts to come together. And so the bottom line is we have a paradigm of bankers wanting to print insane amounts of new currency. And of course, as you know, there is a cost and a consequence of doing so. You debauch the currency, you destroy its value. So we have these bankers printing vast, insane quantities of all these paper currencies simultaneously. And of course, it's deliberately done simultaneously in order to produce the effect we're seeing now, which is that all of these paper currencies are plummeting lower together. The phenomenon, which our criminal governments call, quote unquote, competitive devaluation. And of course, it's so important that the debauchement occur simultaneously because if this was taking place one at a time, we would see these currencies being destroyed because we would see the exchange rate of one totally collapse versus the exchange rates of the other. It's by doing the collapse simultaneously and only allowing relatively minor fluctuations between the values of these currencies that they can hide the whole scam itself, which is driving all these currencies to zero through their overprinting and excuse me, with the ultimate result being hyperinflation. And that's already baked in the cake. There's nothing that can be done to prevent that. All that can be done now by the bankers is to delay that catastrophic Armageddon. And so, of course, because hyperinflation is a confidence event, taking the currencies down simultaneously like this so that people don't really appreciate the level of collapse is how you keep the confidence from collapsing. Because, of course, if any nation saw their currency plummeting versus all others, confidence collapses, hyperinflation becomes imminent. So it's this simultaneous debauchment of, in particular, the Western currencies, which prevents the confidence collapse, which triggers the hyperinflation.
Now, with that as the backdrop, we learned after Cyprus, when these criminals went in and used Cyprus as a model, and they confirmed, in my mind, they confirmed that Cyprus was in fact a test to see what kind of reaction they would receive from the people. And during the whole event of the bank holiday, the ongoing 2-week, 3-week bank holiday, and then the theft of their savings, are we going to, in your opinion, Jeff, are we going to see that on a global scale? Now, Jeremy Stein of I believe out of Dallas, the Dallas Federal Reserve, he actually came out and said in a memo that this, in fact, was the model going forward. That's how they were going to do it. And are they going to? Are we going to see that on a global scale, or are we going to see it happen in Japan and then in the UK and the United States and Canada? Are they going to do
Certainly,
it all at one time?
it'll certainly occur across the corrupt Western bloc. And, I think I've been as outspoken on this subject as anybody, especially back in 2013 when these events were first unfolding. I was very clear myself. One headline was, the Cyprus steal, a premeditated bank robbery. And I've been very clear that this indeed was a deliberate test case so that they could call it a quote unquote precedent.
Yes.
And this is the insanity of our lawless times. The financial crime syndicate commits some heinous crime. Our governments don't punish them for the crime. And so instead of it being called a crime by the corporate media, it's instead called a legal precedent. In other words, if you get away with a crime in our criminal societies, it becomes a legal precedent.
Nice. Well, that sounds so much nicer.
I mean, it just another example of the total Machiavellian and insanity of the propaganda. We're not punishing them for this crime, so that makes it legal.
Yeah. Yeah. Since nobody went to jail,
Yeah, yeah.
then it's not a crime. It's
And of
it's
course,
it's a
the other thing
situation.
was it was deliberately done in a small jurisdiction. You
Yes.
wouldn't do the test case in the United States first, where it's going to attract maximum attention. You do it in the smallest, most out of the way backwater jurisdiction you can find. You know, uh, Keep the reporting as muted as possible on it, but specifically mention the word precedent, precedent, precedent. And then, of course, right after that, we see all the puppet governments creating all of their bail-in mechanisms to so that they're ready to perpetrate this mass robbery when the one bank gives the signal. And I do believe it's likely going to be a single mass steal because, of course, if they try to do these massive bail-ins one by one, what's immediately going to happen is once people in one jurisdiction see their neighbors getting robbed and their entire life savings gone, they're going to rush to their bank and grab everything they've got and take it out before they can be robbed themselves. And of course, this brings us to the other conspiracy these puppet governments are working on, which is to ban cash, so that we're
Right.
forced to leave our wealth in the banks, so the bankers can steal it via bail-ins whenever they please, and they don't have to interrupt their tea time or whatever to do so.
Well, we wouldn't want that to happen. I
No.
mean, wouldn't want any disruption in their day. That would, heaven forbid.
And
Um,
of course, the other reason that we have this whole phenomenon of bail-ins in the first place was because after the crash of '08, the financial crime syndicate, the one bank, looted all of our national treasuries dry to literally the verge of bankruptcy, which of course is why they're now all teetering on bankruptcy. And so there's nothing more that can be stolen out of national treasuries. So they had to find a new means of wealth confiscation and wealth theft, and the only thing left was to target individual private assets.
which they've had their sights on for some time now, and
Indeed.
they have the ways and means of doing it at this point.
Yes, it's now legal.
It's now legal.
Just say,
Exactly.
oh yeah, J.P. Morgan's going to steal that $1 billion off of so and so, and Goldman Sachs is going to steal that 100 million off of so and so, and because they've been doing it for a while now, it's legal.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's all good. So sorry for your bad luck. And it seems, Jeff, with all that said, that we are definitely, or at least in my mind, it seems that we're moving closer on a daily basis to some kind of financial or economic collapse. And the propaganda just seems to get thicker and heavier as the days go by. And what do you see as a trigger to ignite all of this?
Well, of course, because our economies are basically already bankrupt, because our economies are basically already ruined, you don't really need anything to trigger the collapse. All you have to do is stop lying your faces off and saying this is what's really happening in our economies, and then if people will immediately run screaming through the streets saying, "Oh no, the world's coming to an end," because if they ever got a whiff of the truth, this is what they would see. And
Yes.
so, maybe the trigger is going to be a Fed rate hike. Maybe it'll actually happen.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe it's going to be blaming it on China's quote unquote stock bubble.
Yep.
So the thing is, we have these, this crime syndicate manufacturing various mini scenarios that could be used as a trigger. So I'm not trying to say which particular one will be the trigger. I rather just try to point out this could be it, that could be it. For me, I'm looking instead more to timing, and of course, as you know, I'm fairly unequivocal about the fact that I think this next scheduled crash is due in the next 12 months to coincide with the U.S. election cycle, and because that's simply how it's been done over the last 15 years or so, when the when one half of the two-party dictatorships had its 8-year uh, play spree in power, they get blamed as the villain for a quote unquote crash. You send in the next half of the two-party dictatorship as the white knight, and they get to run amok in government for 8 years. Then they get blamed for a crash, and you repeat the whole cycle again. So based on that timing, which we've seen over the last while, the next crash is already scheduled. But the question becomes, do they have the guts to actually go ahead with it? Because these criminals know better than anybody how much destruction they've wrought. They know better than anybody how close our economies are to total collapse, how close our monetary systems are to total collapse. Do they actually have the balls, or alternatively the insanity, to go through with their crash scenario? Because I seriously question whether these bankrupt, totally destroyed economies can withstand any sort of shock like that without absolute collapse. And of course, absolute collapse means hyperinflation, debt jubilee, and the total reset, which we're wanting to occur, but not wanting to occur under those sorts of circumstances.
Yeah, I don't want it to occur. I can tell you that right now.
Well, we need it to occur.
We
It's going to
need
be
it to
extremely
occur.
painful when it happens, and all we can hope for is that when it's triggered, it will happen in the least destructive manner. And of course, that's becoming a fainter and fainter hope, because
Yes,
what we see unfolding is that it's most likely to occur in the most destructive manner.
I think. Yeah, that's what I see is unfortunately the most destructive manner. Do you see bombs involved in this?
Will it be a world war? Will it be a global plague? I mean, the thing is, at one time, talking about stuff like this would be what you were doing if you were reading comic books and talking with your buddy. Because the only place we'd ever encounter ideas like this was in the realm of comic book villains. But now, of course, we have these sorts of psychopaths totally in charge. Talking about winning strategic nuclear wars, and planting their bugs in Africa and that to quote unquote reduce the surplus population. So we're dealing with people that make the comic book villains look like pussycats. These people are totally insane, capable of absolutely anything, including accidentally wiping us out. And of course, that's the truly scary part. Another Fukushima disaster, or maybe simply, totally destroying the Earth's ecosystem and climate to such an extent that the climate itself spins out of control. We have massive tidal waves and just a natural disaster end of humanity.
As none of that sounds good, but it sounds within the realm of reality because they are that crazy. They are completely insane, and I just wish I keep praying that the people are going to wake up, that the masses are going to see something that triggers in their mind the truth. But that's just
Well, that's why we
that
do.
may be lost hope on my part.
But that's why we do what we do. You
Yes,
know, uh, Maybe it's only reaching one new person a day or one new person a week, but you keep chipping away, because eventually enough people, will become informed to reach that critical mass. And once the critical mass is achieved, there'll be some sort of positive reform start to enter the picture. And so it's just a matter of achieving that critical mass and racing to try to do so before the bankers destroy everything.
yes, and I hope we can get there. I hope we get there before them.
Yeah.
And I want to change gears a little bit here, and with physical silver, obviously in tighter supply than is currently known. And I have very good information that some of these larger silver producing countries around the world are in major decline. And there's getting ready to be an article, there's getting ready to be a couple of articles that are coming out written by someone else, not me, but they're going to be informing us as to the seriousness of these declines in the mining sector. And so we already know that the silver supply is tight. Otherwise, the U.S. Mint would not have sold out. We're starting to see gold blow off the shelf at an ever increasing pace. And how, I mean, there was, as far as gold is concerned, there were more gold eagles sold by the U.S. Mint in July than the entire second quarter, according to Steve St. Angelo. I mean, that's incredible. Do you see a force majeure in the cards, or how can the COMEX hold on at this point?
Well, I think that the big thing here that readers need to understand is the totally different paradigm that exists between the gold market and the silver market. Excuse me. We start with the basic fact that the gold market is a much bigger market because the bankers haven't been able to destroy gold's allure as an asset to the same extent they have with silver. So, but on the one hand, we have a market with greater overall demand than the silver market in proportionate terms to what the available supply is. But then we look at the other side of the equation, which are stockpiles. And here, of course, once again, we see things are totally different. It's the gold market that has the massive stockpiles because, as we know, basically all of the gold that's ever been mined has been preserved and conserved. And then meanwhile, the silver market, where we have the phenomenon of silver being consumed because it's used in small quantities and thrown away, we have global stockpiles almost gone. So, we have these two very different markets, and it's so hard to talk about them at the same time when we talk about default. So, I know that actually you were recently spending a lot of time talking with Jim Willey about the gold market, so I'm going to focus more on the silver market.
Okay.
And, excuse me, when I try to look at the big picture of the silver market, my starting point is to go back in time to when we still had some reasonably clear picture on what was happening in the marketplace. And in my mind, that's going back a full decade to 2005. At that time, for all intents and appearances, we were still getting reasonably accurate reporting on actual inventories in the silver market. And the reason I say this is because if you look at a graph of inventories going back from 2005 over the previous 15 years before that, what we see is a line going almost straight down. So, of course, the bankers would have no reason to lie and say that inventories were plummeting straight down because that's against their own interests. So we have to assume that's accurate. From 1990 to 2005, global silver inventories plummeted by 90%. And of course, it was in basically a straight downward curve. So there was no reason to expect that curve to change. In 2005, the bankers began their total inventory fraud in both the silver and the gold market through the introduction of their quote-unquote bullion ETFs. And so because of that inventory fraud, since 2005, we've basically lost any sort of clear picture of the gold market or the silver market with respect to inventories and COMEX inventories in particular. But the trajectory for silver was leading us to default, not simply a crisis, but default by around the year 2007.
Wow.
And by my estimate, we had an annual shortfall somewhere in the vicinity of 100 to 200 million ounces. So the question is, why haven't we had this default? The thing is the industrial users of silver can't use the bankers' paper for their products. The people that are buying all these silver maples and silver eagles, they're not made out of paper. So we know that these people are still able to get their silver for their real world applications. So where is it coming from?
Exactly.
And so, I guess it's about a year ago or so now, I came out with a thesis which I think is fairly credible, entitled The Secret Silver Stockpile. And, it's simply a hypothesis that back when this crime syndicate, which of course is now well over 100 years old, was literally looting the world's silver, they looted all the silver out of India, they confiscated the silver in the United States, that, somewhere over that period of time, they simply grabbed a big chunk of that global silver stockpile, hid it away, and kept it for a rainy day. And of course, the thing is, with silver being the people's money, what these oligarchs want to do is to keep silver out of the people's hands. So, of course, consuming it and destroying it now is great, But simply hiding it and hoarding it was also a way of keeping it out of the people's hands. So, the premise that there is a secret silver stockpile in the control of the oligarchs is not in any way unreasonable. They were doing massive thefts of silver. They don't want that silver to get into the people's hands. So, it holds together. By my calculations, between 2007 and today, there would have been a need for somewhere in the vicinity of an extra billion ounces of silver to satisfy the shortfall between depleted inventories and the demands that existed since those inventories were gone. So, if those calculations are anywhere near accurate, there was a secret silver stockpile. It's used up a billion ounces. There can't be that much more remaining. And of course, when we look at all of the Ponzi schemes in general, what screams out at us again and again is, okay, it's gone on for a long time, but it can't last much longer. And of course, we've been saying this for a while, but
unfortunately,
but of course, the level of insanity keeps increasing exponentially. So when we say it can't last much longer, we're not saying this in just terms of repeating ourselves to hear our own voices. It's because the evidence is just getting so much more extreme and insane that there's no other conclusion possible. Things should have fallen apart in 2010. They should have fallen apart in 2012. They should have fallen apart in 2014. That doesn't mean they're not going to fall apart in 2016. It means they really should fall apart in 2016. So, it's very possible that everything has been timed to just hold together until this final event. The next crash in 2016, the massive lootings that they're going to do via their bail-ins. And at that point, they say, who cares? We've stolen everything out of these cultures. Go to hell. We'll let the precious metal markets collapse now. We're going to run and hide.
Well, it's interesting that you are talking about the billion-ounce deficit that it came from somewhere. Because 2 days ago, the Silver Institute released their 2015 report. And lo and behold, according to the Silver Institute, we're going to wind up at 57.7 million ounces in deficit for 2015.
Well, of course, here we have to back up and give your readers a good laugh, because it's only over the last 3 years that the Silver Institute started changing its record keeping. And I'm going to change some personal. I'm going to take some personal credit here, because I suspect that I might be partially responsible for the change, because I was laughing at how they used to keep their records before. The way the Silver Institute used to report silver supply and demand every single year was the same. And when I mean the same, every year they reported that silver demand equaled silver supply right down to the exact last ounce. Supply and demand perfectly matched every single year. There could never be a surplus. There could never be a deficit. It always matched perfectly. And of course, this is absolutely laughable. No matter how carefully a centrally planned economy tried to create that sort of a market, it's absolutely impossible. There's simply too much day-to-day fluctuations to ever have such perfection. So the fact that they were reporting this year after year after year was just an indication of open fraud. And so, I laughed at it year after year after year. Oh, once again, we got supply and demand numbers identical. Ha, ha, ha. And so finally in 2013 or so, they ended this charade and started to change their accounting system to acknowledge the fact that in the real world, every year, there must be a surplus or there must be a deficit. And of course, in the silver market, there must be a deficit.
Yes.
And so since 2013, the Silver Institute has now been acknowledging deficits in the silver market. And of course, that begs the question, well, what was happening during all the years they were pretending that supply and demand were the same?
Yeah, balanced to zero.
Yeah.
Well, it was probably in deficit as well. I mean, it would have to have been.
And maybe even more deficit. Maybe part of the reason that they're finally actually doing some semi-realistic accounting now is that they're able to massage the numbers to make the deficit only look small compared to previous years.
Well, I mean, and you asked the question that I've been asking at least a year and a half, maybe closer to 2 years, and that's where is the silver coming from? Where is the silver? Where's the gold? Where is it coming from? I mean, because we can look at the data, and all of the data says that all of the tonnage and all of the ounces are all spoken for in these markets.
And then, and
And
then in that tight market, we see what's happened in India over the past couple of years.
exactly.
The bankers went and imposed their gold embargo on India to force India's government to stop importing gold almost completely for the better part of a year. And Indians, of course, immediately went and started buying massive quantities of silver with both hands. And India's silver imports for 2014 and 2013 immediately exploded to new all-time records, even ahead of their records back in 2008 when the bankers crashed the price of silver below $10 an ounce. So, we had this already extremely tight market, and then we have this explosion in silver demand from India. Where's the extra silver for that? And yet, of course, when we see what the bankers are actually doing, um, looting the gold of India, looting the gold of Ukraine. Now they're working on looting the gold out of India. I don't know if you've caught that, but they
Yes.
basically persuaded Indians to give the bankers their gold.
Yes. And they're going to pay them interest on it.
Yeah, pay them interest. Yeah, on something that generates no income.
Please,
See, there's nothing.
anyone in India, please listen. Do not be part of that.
Yeah, nothing fraudulent about paying interest on something that generates no income.
Right.
So this is the whole thing. We've seen them show a lot more concern about the gold market, even though any little bits and pieces of information we're able to piece together ourselves suggests they should be much more concerned about the silver market. So this is, for me, this is one of the big conundrums. We see almost panic in terms of them trying to stomp on gold demand, and yet only relatively minor concern about holding back silver demand. What does that attitude reflect, if not that they still have some remnants of a secret stockpile tucked away someplace?
Well, they may have, and if they do, it must be gargantuan, because
Or it was at
it
one time.
was, yeah. It's now down to gigantic.
May just be down to the vapors by this point, for all we know.
Well, it may be. It may be like the gold vaults that Ken Hoffman was talking about in the LBMA a couple of years ago, when he was saying, that 28 million ounces or whatever the number was that had left the LBMA gold vaults. That there was no gold in them.
If you're
Period.
somebody who likes listening to a nice loud echo, go stand inside a gold vault and make a noise.
Right. Exactly. Especially one that's associated with the LBMA.
You bet.
Oh, well, Jeff, I certainly appreciate all your time and all your wisdom this afternoon. This has been fantastic, and I really hope that we can do a quick update like this again in the not too distant future.
It's always fun to get together, Rory, so just give me a call and we'll set it up.
Well, all right. Well, please be sure and check out all of Jeff's great work over at bullionbullscanada.com, as well as his work that he's doing for SprotMoneyNews.com. So, Jeff, we will talk with you soon.
Thanks very much, Rory, and best to you.